In this video, we're going to look at helpers and how we use helper methods and modules inside of our views, our Ruby on Rails views. So let's take a look at a typical HTML file here. And we have a title, not the page title, but a title that gets printed out on the page. And it says listing comments. If we look at the HTML page itself, that's this information here. If I go in here, you'll see there's no information here. It just kind of gives us this raw look at it. Same thing if I do an edit, you'll see I get a title here. It's editing comment, but I'm not very consistent about how that works. So perhaps I want to make it a little bit more consistent across it, and maybe make it into a more programmable way. Now, one way I could do it would actually set a instant variable up here that gets generated into the controller, but that would mean that every one of these views here, so if we look at how many I got here, just right here, I would have to go into every one of these and put an instant variable with the name, and then I'd have to go into all the controllers, or into that controller, find that controller here, each one of these methods and set up a name, and perhaps I don't want to do that. That's a lot of work, and it's certainly not dry. So what do? Well, probably the easiest thing to do is create a helper, and I do that by creating it in my helpers folder. And when we generated our application with Rails, it created for us this helper folder, and anything appearing in these helper files will be available to our views to kind of help us get that view out, get it looking right, get things generated in there the way we want. Now you see, here's the one for comment. There's also one for application that we can use helpers that spread across the entire application if we want to share them around, if it's something we have more in common. So let's go here. We're inside of our comment helper right now, and let's add a method for setting that title. So we'll just call it header, and we'll just make it real easy and say if header will return that, or we'll say movie critic. So essentially this little method if says that if the header is defined, we'll go ahead and return that, or if that isn't, then we're going to return this because this is true. So this is an OR. So now how do we go ahead and use that little helper method that we created? Well, again, we could go into our list and put it up here, but it isn't going to, if we have, all these other views here, we're going to have to do that again in every one of them. We're going to have to add that code. We're much better off going into here and going down in here, going ahead and putting in our little helper call, and we called it header. Double check, that's what we called it, header. So we've just dropped that in there now. Now we'll have to go into our list, and I have that in there already. I probably want to get rid of that and save that. And now when we call that, it's actually going to come up with whatever this value is. So let's switch over here and regenerate that. And now it comes out and says movie critic. Well, that works in some regards. It doesn't look right for one thing. Let's wrap that in a header, H2. And, I want it to say something else. So I'm going to go in here, back into my controller. And I'm going to say, okay, if we've got a list, we're going to say that header is going to be equal to comment list. So now let's switch over here and refresh this. So there we have comment list. But let's go into show and see what happens there. Now we have movie critic. And why is that? Because when we called the show method, the instant variable header was not defined anymore. So when we called our little helper from right here, we said, call that header helper. So that calls this one. It dives in here, goes in and says, header. It's not defined, so I'm just going to return movie critic. So that's movie critic gets put into here, wrapped in these H2 header tags, and the result is this. And if we go back, you'll see that, Now, we do have something, header is set to comment list. If we go look at our code in our controller, you'll see that, yep, when list is called, our header instant variable is set to comment list. And if we want to add this into show, we could say this show comment. Now let's go back, and this should say show comment. So we've effectively created a nice little helper that allows us to have a header that we control from our controller instead of in code buried inside of our views. And this list view knows nothing about what header is going to be put in there, and in fact it's in our layout, and we've stuck pretty true to the principles of dry to do that. And if we really wanted to get down into it, we could eliminate this and do a before filter where we actually set this based on what method was called by the controller, and we can do that.